Hey everyone! Today, we're diving into the Edo period in Japan, which ran from 1603 to 1868 when the Tokugawa family was in charge. This era is named after Edo, what we now call Tokyo, where the Tokugawa shogunate set up their government. Sometimes, it's called the early modern period because this is when a lot of modern Japanese culture and society started to take shape. So, in 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu led a group of Eastern Japan's daimyo to victory against Western Japan's daimyo at the Battle of Sekigahara, ending 140 years of civil war. In 1603, he followed in the footsteps of Minamoto no Yoritomo by getting the emperor to appoint him as shogun. Although the emperor had no real power, his endorsement gave Ieyasu political legitimacy. Ieyasu set up his own military government, or bakufu. Even though the Tokugawa were the strongest warrior family, Ieyasu didn't want to destroy all the other warrior families and create a centralized state. Instead, he let local daimyo manage their territories as long as they acknowledged Tokugawa rule nationally. The Tokugawa controlled about 30% of Japan's land, with the rest divided among around 270 daimyo families. Ieyasu categorized these daimyo into three groups. Sanki daimyo, collateral branches of the Tokugawa family. Fudai daimyo, loyal to Ieyasu before the Battle of Sekigahara. Tazama daimyo, swore loyalty after the battle. These daimyo's lands were called han, and their size was measured in how much rice they could produce, known as koku. The more trusted Fudai daimyo controlled smaller, strategically placed han, while the less trusted Tazama daimyo had larger han located far from central Japan. The Tokugawa implemented several measures to control the daimyo, such as restricting the size of their armies, allowing only one castle per territory, and requiring approval for fortification repairs. From the 1630s, daimyo had to spend alternate years living in Edo and their own territories, with their families staying in Edo as hostages. To maintain social order, the Tokugawa established a four-tier hereditary class system. Warriors at the top, about 7% of the population, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. This system aimed to reduce violence by limiting access to weapons and restricting warriors' use of violence. Additionally, the Tokugawa limited Japan's contact with foreign countries. Europeans had arrived in the 16th century for trade and to spread Christianity, but the Tokugawa feared they might support rebellious daimyo. As a result, they banned Christianity and expelled all Europeans except the Dutch, who were allowed to trade in Nagasaki. Historians call the Tokugawa's political structure the Baku-Han system, consisting of the Bakufu and the Han. While sometimes described as a form of feudalism, it was quite different from the European system during the Middle Ages. From 1600 to 1720, Japan's population doubled from 15 million to 30 million. This boom was thanks to the Tokugawa political system, which brought peace after years of civil war. With no more armies ravaging the land, farmers could focus on growing food for their families. Daimyo, the local lords, also had a big reason to boost their land's productivity. The Tokugawa shogunate didn't directly tax the daimyo, but imposed heavy financial burdens, especially the costly alternate attendance system that could eat up to 40% of their income. To deal with this, daimyo needed more money. They tried to squeeze more taxes from farmers, but the farmers often resisted. A better solution was to increase the productivity of their land. Daimyo encouraged new farming techniques, irrigation, and cash crops like cotton, silk, wax, paper, and salt, which could be sold beyond their territories. This led to the growth of trade at local, regional, and national levels, sparking a commercial economy. And the population boom and trade expansion led to greater urbanization. Towns grew around local castles, which varied in size depending on the wealth of the local daimyo. Some castles were small, while others, like Himeji Castle, were enormous. Warriors were encouraged to live in these towns and transition from being fighters to civil administrators. To support the warrior class, artisans and merchants were drawn to these towns, which were divided into sections based on the class system. Some of these Edo period districts, like those in Hagi and Kanazawa, have survived and are now popular tourist attractions. On a national level, Edo, now Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto became major cities. By the late 17th century, Edo had over 1 million residents and was the largest city in the world. It was Japan's political hub, with a large population of warriors. Osaka emerged as a major commercial center in western Japan, dominated by merchants. Kyoto, with the imperial family, remained Japan's cultural and aristocratic center. In the latter half of the 17th century, new cultural forms emerged in these cities, reflecting the lives of ordinary people. Prostitution was legal and confined to pleasure quarters, which, despite terrible working conditions for women, became centers of a thriving entertainment industry. This world was known as the ukiyo, or floating world, a term that originally meant the fleeting world in Buddhism but came to describe the lifestyle of the pleasure quarters. Two new types of theater, bunraku means puppet theater, and kabuki means live actors, became popular. Chikamatsu Manzimen, a famous playwright of the time, provided insight into contemporary society through his plays. Ihara Saikaku wrote novels about the urban class's lives, and Matsuo Basho elevated haiku poetry into a fine art. Hishikawa Moronobu created ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world, vividly capturing scenes from this vibrant culture. And the 17th century also brought significant changes in Japan's intellectual landscape. Before 1600, Shinto and Buddhism were the dominant religions. However, Confucianism, which originated in China in the 5th century BCE as a system of ethics for personal and governmental behavior, started gaining influence. When Buddhism spread to China from India in the 2nd century CE, Confucian scholars developed more complex ideas. During the Song period, thinkers like Zhu Zai created Neo-Confucianism, a comprehensive philosophy about individuals, society, and the universe. Neo-Confucianism holds that human nature is fundamentally good but can be obscured by worldly interactions. To restore this inherent goodness, individuals need to engage in self-cultivation. Some Neo-Confucian ideas were introduced to Japan during the Kamakura and Muromachi periods alongside new Buddhist thoughts. However, Neo-Confucianism only became a distinct school of thought in Japan during the early Edo period. Initially, the Japanese government was suspicious of early Confucianists, fearing they might promote Christianity, which had been banned in the 1620s. Over time, independent scholars emerged, making a living by teaching Confucianism. While Confucianism was often seen as a conservative ideology supporting the Tokugawa's hierarchical social order, more recent research suggests this was not entirely the case. In China, Confucianism was part of the state apparatus, with civil service exams based on Confucian classics determining government positions. This system, theoretically merit-based but practically limited to the wealthy elite, was different from Japan's hereditary military aristocracy. Any suggestion that Japan's government should be merit-based was discouraged. One notable scholar, Yamaga Soko, argued that since peace had come to Japan, warriors needed a new role beyond fighting. He believed they should govern and act as role models, engaging in self-cultivation in both military training and literary arts. Although Yamaga was temporarily banished from Edo for offending powerful figures, other Confucian scholars like Ogyu Sarai and Arai Hakusuki became respected advisors to shoguns. Confucianism posed a particular problem for Japanese scholars. It traditionally regarded China as the Middle Kingdom and other countries as barbarian. Some Japanese scholars accepted this view of Japan's inferiority, while others challenged it. Using textual analysis techniques learned from Confucianism, critics argued that Japan was superior to China. Some drew on Shinto ideas about the divinity of the imperial family, while others claimed that the true spirit of Confucianism had been preserved in Japan but lost in China. This type of thought, known as kokugaku means national learning, represented an early form of nationalism. At the start of the 18th century, the Akko incident in Edo highlighted how much Japanese society had evolved during the 17th century. In 1701, Asano Naganori, the lord of Akko, attacked an official named Kira Yoshinaka inside Edo Castle while preparing for a court ceremony. Although Kira was only slightly injured, disturbing the peace in this way was a capital offense. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, the ritual suicide expected of warriors, and his domain was confiscated. This left Asano's retainers as ronin, or masterless warriors. 47 of these ronin plotted secretly against Kira, believing he was responsible for Asano's death. Nearly 2 years later, they launched a surprise attack on Kira's mansion and killed him. They took his severed head to the temple where Asano was buried and waited for authorities. They were arrested, and after a government investigation, were also ordered to commit seppuku. This verdict underscored that, despite their demonstration of loyalty, the government would not tolerate unsanctioned violence. From around 1720, Japan's population stabilized at approximately 30 million. People chose to have fewer children to maintain their living standards, and Japan had reached its ecological limits given the technology of the time. Frequent famines and natural disasters also claimed many lives. This economic strain began to pressure the Tokugawa political system just as foreign threats loomed. Early in the Edo period, Japan managed to expel most Europeans due to similar levels of technology. The government required Dutch traders in Nagasaki to provide reports on the outside world. In the 1720s, Shogun Tokugawa Yoshimin relaxed rules on importing foreign books, fostering the growth of Rengaku or Dutch learning, which embraced European scientific ideas. Thus, despite limited contact with foreign countries, Japan's government stayed somewhat informed about global events. However, by the late 1700s, foreign ships began requesting Japan to open for trade, but these requests were consistently denied. From the late 18th century, European countries like England experienced the Industrial Revolution, enhancing production and developing railways and steam-powered ships. Improved weaponry gave Europeans a significant military advantage. The British victory in the Opium War in the 1840s alarmed Japan's leaders about the threat posed by foreign barbarians. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry led steam-powered ships to Japan, demanding it open for trade. The following year, Japan signed an agreement with the U.S., partially lifting restrictions on foreign visits. By 1858, more agreements with the UK, Russia, and France opened up Japan further, exposing the Bakufu's perceived weakness and vulnerability to domestic opposition. The challenge was spearheaded by the Satsuma and Chashu daimyo. Critics argued that the Tokugawa had illegitimately taken over the imperial family's authority and demanded its return. They linked this to the foreign threat with the slogan, Sono Joy, means, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. Attacks on foreigners in Chashu and Satsuma prompted European retaliations, showing that expelling foreigners was impractical, leading to efforts to overthrow the Bakufu. After a brief civil war, the last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, returned his authority to the imperial court in the Meiji Restoration, ending Tokugawa rule. In the post-World War II era, English-speaking historians initially viewed the Edo period negatively, associating it with the militarism of the 1930s and 1940s. However, with Japan's post-war democratic success and economic growth from the 1960s, this view has largely shifted. Today, the Edo period is seen more positively, recognized for developing many distinctive features of Japanese society, despite its darker aspects.